through.
Yeah, let's do quick intros, and then if people pop in, we can let them say hello. Shmuel, do you want to just kick us off?
Yeah, absolutely. Nicole, you'll kind of like call names, and we'll just
yeah, you go ahead, and I'll call the next person.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Shmuel Silverman, Multi Innovation. I'm very happy to be here today. The focus of our group is technology for humankind. We really want to change the world, and we are looking at it very methodically. We started with a process for privacy, and now we are continuing with that process for security. Today we'll basically do kind of like introductions. Every person will say hi as a roundtable and check in on security, specific cybersecurity, whatever you want to add to you know, what happened in the last few weeks that is interesting for all of us. We'll have Alex helping us go through cybersecurity ecosystem and through the process. We'll have group discussion at the end to see what are the next step on the subject and wrap up. Please know that our interest is not only to understand and what's going on out there and what are the key issues that needs to be resolved, but also to propose solutions and help people get those solutions into market. So we do not stop people from on the team to basically stand up and say, okay, I'm going to build a company and do the following. To many meetings, we have both investors and top-notch people like yourself showing up to talk about technology in their space. So we are hoping that through the process, we will identify multiple initiatives that we can go after and fund and make happen. So that's for me. Thank you.
Perfect. Axel, would you like to go next?
Yeah, whoops. Yeah, so I'm a, what can I say, serial entrepreneur, founder of a whole bunch of companies. One of them focused on security, building basically security processors, because I'm of the opinion that security software hasn't worked so far, and you know, trying to make more software available with more vulnerabilities to protect machines from attacks seems to me like clinical insanity. So my new company is focused on HPC, but of course with the twist on not only scalability, but also security.
Perfect, thank you. Chris Clausen. Chris, would you like to go next?
Hi, Chris Clausen here. My background historically has been in digital fraud management, authentication, identity management, in some cyber for e-commerce and fintech. Most recently, I started my own company focused on technology approaches to help seniors and their family for independent aging with better outcomes. But still, security is near and dear to my heart and something I can't leave. So definitely I'm delighted to be part of this endeavor here.
Thanks, Chris. Earl Cohen.
Hi, I'm Earl Cohen. I've got kind of a mixed background in hardware and software and in patents and IP, and I've worked with Shmuel on a few things, and I've learned most of what I know about this area from working with Axon. So I kind of have a academic interest and also a personal interest, as all of us should, in how we deal with all this crap.
Perfect, thanks. George?
So I'm George Usey. I am a backbone engineer by trade. My career has been focused mainly on internet governance and standards, especially in the upgrade of IPv6 and security of the internet and stability of the internet in general. I'm also a board member of Secure the Village, in addition to my chair position for the North American IPv6 Task Force and the California IPv6 Task Force. to pay the bills, I have a cyber risk management company called OmniStruct, where we set companies up under the NIST framework using kind of a utility-based approach, working through managed service providers and their customers, as well as the mid-market. So I'm also a blacksmith. So.
Great, thanks, George. Last but not least, Alex.
Hey guys, Alex Rayter. I know all of you, George. Good to see you here. I'm a principal at Phoenix 2.0 by day, and we're a managed IT and security provider, and most of our clients have been unregulated, privately held entities, but that's starting to change. I'm looking at a couple of engagements in the oil and gas and utility sector through a colleague of mine who's an ex-Chevron guy, and then we also recently proposed on a project to do vulnerability assessments and pen testing for a bunch of Class A office buildings in San Francisco for a riser management company. So it's security is quickly evolving in our practice as well, and my interest in all of this is also certainly professional, but also personal. I think this is kind of the a societal issue du jour, aside from COVID and politics and all these kinds of things. It's really becoming pretty critical, and the spirit of this group is to try to not just get together and kind of talk about these things, but actually see how we can help, because everybody here has something that they've done in business that's compelling and brings a background in technology and cybersecurity. And I think the collective here has potential to do something perhaps transformative, not just another startup to fill a need in the market and make some money, but maybe something that actually helps with the underlying issue of cybersecurity and privacy or whatever else we decide to tackle. So good to be with you guys. Thank you. So I wanted to just really quick, because there's been a couple of news events that have happened since last time, mainly Colonial, I think, hadn't popped off yet since last March, and then JBS Meet, and we've got now the government really taking a look at cyber. Biden and Putin are talking about it. I don't remember if George has been here before, if he's received any of the emails, but kind of what happened at this group since we've been looking at security, I think since, I think we started in Q4 of last year, right? It was our first security meeting. Yep. Yeah. And a couple of things came out of our sort of meetings that frankly, I had heard at this group and hadn't heard in the press. I don't mean in the general press, I mean in the cybersecurity kind of ecosystem press, mainly that there's a software code supply chain issue, right? And second of all, that there's no kind of agnostic sort of rating system, overall rating system for security posture. There are a lot of industry and vertical specific frameworks, but there's nothing overarching. And the other, kind of lost my train of thought here, but good to see Kirk. But there was one more issue that we identified that frankly hasn't, I only saw press coverage about it months after we had talked about it, which tells me we're onto something. And what I wanted to do is just take into account things that have transpired last month, because things that, that's a change when the government is telling the oil and gas sector, you all need to go through vulnerability assessments and present your findings. And I think it's NERC that regulates oil and gas. That's a little bit different, right? So I just wanted to check in with everybody, kind of what's your take on sort of the last couple of months worth of news, and what are you seeing that you think is maybe different, better, or not?
Well, okay, if I can get just two topics. One is, in fact, Colonial Pipeline. I think it's great you bring it up. And what really pisses me off about that one is that, believe it or not, the attack was against the billing systems and not against the pumps. So when they figured out that they couldn't bill their customers, they shut it down. So it was not that the intruders got to the pumps and shut them down. It was Colonial was unable to provide billing for that. So if I were the CEO, I would have called all of my customers, would have said, you know what, we can't bill you exactly by the penny, but we'll still deliver the oil. and we'll do it based on last month's consumption. And we'll just do what we need to do to make it work and keep it running. Instead, because the billing system got shut down, they decided to shut the pipeline down and shut off the pumps. And that's ridiculous. For that alone, that guy should have gone to prison. The other thing is, I had a look at, believe it or not, the build systems for Linux, because I wanted to find out if, in fact, the supply chain issue that SolarWinds created is traceable, and who could have been the culprit and which of the files are there. So we just, for shits and grins, I had 3 people as contractors help me. We ran a diff between the different build scripts for Unix and Linux, Ubuntu, Debian, and all the major distributions, to look in the last 18 months if we could find anything where there's something that is suspiciously changed in the build script. And we didn't find anything that is majorly different. So clearly there were no new files integrated that were different from what they were before. Very clearly, it means that whoever created the attack vector knew that people would ultimately try to figure out if there's a diff in the build scripts. And so the build scripts themselves haven't changed. So very, very clearly, somebody managed to get into a DLL that nobody seems to check, because we certainly looked, and I can tell you, we looked at 10, 15,000 files that are part of the build script. We couldn't find anything that would allow the installation of a novel backdoor. We simply couldn't. So it's somewhere deep in the bowels of something where something gets called by something else. It must be nested multiple levels down. We can't find it.
Interesting. Yeah, Axel, that may be worth writing up a brief overview on, just kind of a tear sheet that we could have maybe on the website, unless there's something proprietary in that procedure that you went through. But
there's nothing proprietary at all. I mean, that's basically what everybody does anyway. If you find something that throws you off, right? I mean, basically, we looked at all the build scripts. That's not proprietary. That's what everybody can do. We went back 18 months or a little bit more than that, and couldn't find anything.
Okay, well, let's put a thumbtack in that. That's really interesting. Let me share my screen for a second, just kind of remind folks where where we are in the process. So this is our kind of progression flow for a topic, right? Can you guys see that okay? Let me just maybe if I do that, that'll be easier to see. But so, we're doing the actively monitor and update, and there's actually a piece missing, which is what we're doing today, which is the stakeholder and influence mapping exercise, which I think a lot of entities don't go through, right? When they're ideating around solutions for information security. And so that's why we're going to do some of that today. And then depending on what sort of in total, when we look at that document and what are the findings, right? Because already some really interesting things came out in terms of who are the stakeholders, right? So can you guys see that okay? That Word document? Yeah, okay. So, just looking at who the stakeholders are, right? I mean, there's a bunch of entities here, and that's, actually, that's not even the full list. I mean, I think the full list is probably here, yeah. I mean, so we've got cyber criminal, we've got educational or institutions, right? Colleges, universities that have information security programs that are basically trying to fill a need in the marketplace with graduates and cranking out, cybersecurity talent, often in programs that are really short, like 6 months. At City College of San Francisco actually has a very competitive one. You know, we've got critical infrastructure service providers and regulators. We've got the government and military, which we have in one section, but they're probably different entities with different sort of interests, right? The military complex is kind of separate from government as a whole, I would think, maybe has different motivations, right? Certainly has in other places in the world in the past. And then we've got the, you know, the various governing bodies, right? Law enforcement, private citizens. We've got the vendor landscape. We've got our clients, right? I mean, so there's all these people with various kind of beliefs and motivations and things that they bring to the table. And I think it's worth looking at what those are. Let me, George, do you have anything that you want to kind of chime in on at this point? You know,
I do. I think that what I was hoping to recognize is that we have some unusual declarations happening. I should say documentation, governance documentation coming out of different organizations, NIST. And I apologize, I missed, there was the last meeting I wasn't able to make. I would have announced that. There is a public feedback, what's called an IR from NIST, or NIST IR 8332, I think is the number. The reason I bring it up is as a part of our stakeholder, NIST being one of our stakeholders, and kind of constraining these initiatives and scopes. You know, these are all, you know, important things to look at, but there's this particular initiative that I'm speaking of. They're trying to measure trust in artificial intelligence compared to users, and they're asking for feedback from the public. They're asking for public feedback on it, and so we'd had a discussion with this about this with JPL, as well as Sandia and some of the folks that are at NIST. Vint was involved as well. I'm sending it out to everybody. But it's basically a method for evaluating trust of AI versus user interaction. And if you think about all the problems that we have with the code we have already, right? And the more automation that happens, the more risk we see and the more compromises we see. This document scares all of us because we're still trying to fix problems from code from 20 years ago that was poorly coded. And so this becomes a critical feedback document. And so we're aggregating feedback publicly under a couple different entities. And as it relates to, you know, my expertise, this is my area of expertise, is governance and feedback and public documents and those sorts of things. But this becomes that part of that, you know, this silo of AI and how we're going to take code that's already getting hacked and trust it more than a user. That's what the document talks about. On a more relatable level, this is like the Cyberdyne in the Terminator movie, you know, trusting the computer, right? To make it simple for people to. So we're writing that document. NIST is embracing and getting feedback on that in terms of AI. So, and they're looking for organizations and possibly an organization like ours to provide feedback. So when it comes to these stakeholder positions, I'm wondering too, do we need some kind of a measurement metric or a rubric here? And because I think that's what this meeting is for, is to determine what does that look like and how do we build that? Am I correct, Alex? Okay.
a metric and rubric for what, George?
For what essentially is stakeholder influencing. So that's what I saw in the email anyway. So
yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, I don't know what the unit of measurement is. We're just trying to kind of put sort of verbiage to it. But yes, I mean, if relative to each other, we're going to have to kind of, you know, so if you look at, I mean, a couple of, sorry, let me go up. So one of the, and by the way, this is a format from Harvard Business School for ideating, for mapping out influencers and stakeholders around any kind of a business idea.
Right,
or even a not-for-profit idea, which is all, it's a worthwhile exercise. I think people often skip it and just kind of shoot into trying to throw things out that the market will pay for. But I think this problem is more complex. So like, power, right, is a unit of measurement, right? The left axis. So, I mean, on a scale of 1 to 10, our clients have very little power, but they have a huge amount of interest, right, in the topic, right? So, I mean, yes, we could assign measurements to these things, on a scale, right, depending on what the category is, right? So, like, I don't know what another example would be, so some of the other kind of resources that get brought to bear by stakeholders and influencers are, capital, right, of various kinds. So political, human capital, financial, expertise, legitimacy. For example, so if we look at, let's look at NIST, right? So what's NIST's belief, right? What do they believe?
Well, they don't know what they believe, and that's why they've sent the document out.
Okay.
And I've read a lot of governance documents. I've read a lot of stuff from NIST as it relates to cybersecurity and trust. This is the first time that I felt like I was reading something off of Freud's bookshelf. So it's monumentally important that, at least from the perspective of stakeholders, that I think the one thing that you can expect to be inserted into the stakeholder world is AI. AI is evolving. So what AI is there and how should it be considered? Because we're making governance decisions in a lot of areas of automation where things like pipeline hack disasters originate. So because and I think the point is that everyone needs to read the first page of that document, because it introduces the problem that we're really facing, which is we're saying we're going to compare a user to an AI system that potentially is calling code that's incredibly vulnerable. That's poor code. And we're going to trust the AI over the person. And now I'm not talking, Cyberdyne, Terminator kind of, that's obviously fantasy. What we're talking about is critical risk situations where you're trusting a system. Like if you have bad code or you have compromise in a driverless vehicle, and it decides to, and it gets owned, then what, right? That's a kind of a basic example. But when we look at the stakeholder influence, I guess my point is it time to start considering AI as a stakeholder?
That is a really interesting question. Yeah.
And so that's why I wanted to raise my hand on this, was to do, as stakeholders, we tend to identify humans and, entities and groups that human brains drive. Well, we have this thing called AI over here. Maybe that's missing out of this. That was the first thing that came to mind when I saw, because you emailed us this document.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think last night.
Yesterday, yeah.
Well, I did look at it, and that's the first thing that popped on it. What about AI and the evolution of, and you can put in for reference NIST, the NIST IR for somebody to look at, so they'll get it real quick, which is called NIST IR 8332. Anybody who Googles it can find it, right?
Yeah.
So, because this is kind of like the first stake in the sand of artificial ethics. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we're going to capture the chat. I saw you put the link in, so we'll get that sent out. As
great. So that may be, that's the only comment I had in terms of maybe modifying that. There's this electronic being that is evolving, which right now, if you talk to anybody in AI, the AI has the intelligence of an earthworm, is kind of the level that it's at right now. It's really, really not that sophisticated, but over time, 100 years from now, perhaps it will be as intelligent as your dog. So, because that's the speed at which the intelligence is going at this point.
George, is it fair to say that in some use cases, AI is much farther along than in others, or is that a general kind of a statement about its level of intelligence?
In an industrial measure, I would argue yes. Like, so a repetitive task where there's only two choices, right? But AI is a different topic. What I'm talking about is what happens when AI is compromised because it's calling old code that we haven't dealt with yet. Yet we're setting standards to say, oh, we're going to trust AI more than the person. That's literally what that document is asked for, public opinion on that.
Yeah, okay, let me throw a bunch of observations in there. So first of all, there are plenty of applications where AI is already vastly exceeding human capabilities. So the newest version of Google's TPU has been floor planned by AI, and the design is vastly better than anything that people have done in anything that's related to it. So it is denser, it got to higher clock frequencies. The entire design took a day and a half instead of about 3 months, and that's it.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. AI is doing tasks that we can't. That's
Exactly.
even out. That's outlined clearly in that
Right.
IR as well.
So the other thing that I would be a little bit wary about is the code that it calls really is not much of relevance. What is much more relevant is the training data set, right? So you can compromise anything that is AI very, very quickly and easily by feeding it false info, right? Because it takes it for granted and assumes it's correct. The code base, I'd be a whole lot less worried about that, because if there's an error, the error will always be, it's symmetric, it doesn't matter, right? So the code base for AI worries me a whole lot less than the training data. Just my 2 cents. But of course, what can happen is you can use it for I mean, everything has dual use, right? So you can use it for nefarious purposes. And one of those, of course, would be if I had an AI system and I'd be able to, using the SolarWinds hack, to attack every server that there is, then the first thing I would be is modify the firmware of every damn server such that I permanently have a backdoor, right? Means I own all of them. That would be what I'd do, right? And that would become indistinguishable from a non-compromised firmware. Right? So again, the code base is something I'm worried about, but it's not my primary concern. None at all. Not at all.
All right, so
Yep, understood.
let's try to go through this a little bit more, and we may need to figure out a different modality for fleshing out the answers here. But while I have you guys, I want to at least make some headway on this so that we kind of see some markers as to where we're headed with some of this. So let's look at, for example, our clients. What are their motivations? They're
Well,
avoiding risk, mitigating risk.
I think mitigating risk and feeling secure. Whether they are secure or not is a different question, right? But I think everybody wants to mitigate the risk and to feel secure.
Anything else?
This may be the same motivation for mitigating the risk, but I think reputation is such a key thing for companies now. And if they fall down in this area, they're toast.
Yeah.
Throw in cost, because the clients pay a certain cost to any breach, and there's money involved.
Yeah. What are their resources, primary resources? Political capital, at least in my clients, that's not a currency that they operate with. So
would you feel like profitability might be a motivation?
Yeah, profit, absolutely, to the extent that they're a commercial entity. Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah, I would expect that.
I'm looking at the resource column and I'm thinking our clients probably don't have a lot of resources at their disposal. They're very, as far as some of the other stakeholders, they have very modest means relative to a lot of the others, which to me kind of is a flag of maybe part of the problem is that in and of themselves, each one of them individually really cannot bring anything to bear to the problem, right?
Don't they all have an IT budget?
Well, some of them do, yeah.
Oh, that's a resource. Admittedly, it's an inadequate one, given the current state of things, but
Yeah.
at least it's something that could be potentially tapped.
And I think too, depending on the size of the company, that expertise is interesting because smaller companies may have more generalists, right, that really can't stay up on some of the more nuanced issues, and so maybe we're relying more on outsourcing versus a bigger company that may have some bench strength or some depth, some of the more novel issues.
But given some of the larger entities that we've seen in the news for this stuff, I mean, they have some expertise in-house, or certainly could hire the expertise, but yet that doesn't seem to have prevented anything or helped them at all. I mean, even the folks that have, Equifax had security folks on staff, but they didn't patch 10-year-old Apache servers. So now the maturity of that whole program was very questionable, but I mean, they had some expertise in the house.
No, they had just titles. I mean, the one guy was a musician, and the lady running the entire show was I think some Russian literature major. So they clearly didn't have a clue what the hell they were doing.
Was that Equifax?
Yeah, that was Equifax.
Okay.
Guys, I think if I may, the clients have actually two different type of data that they would like to protect, not just one type of data. One has to do with their mission, which means whatever they're doing, whatever they're working on, and it can stop them from making profit if it is being taken away or blocked. And another type of data is customer data or their client data, that if it is being taken away, in most cases, only because of the embarrassment they care, but otherwise, why would they care?
Well, I think you're alluding to there are primary and secondary beliefs, motivations, resources, and right. I mean, so I think what you're alluding to, Shmuel, if it's a primary one, it's protecting intellectual property, right?
The primary one, it's an intellectual property is one, and the second one, and which is again, so this is actually a third one. So basically, I'm saying if it's business critical, if you're going to block my business because you have this information, or because you physically blocked my business by encrypting my files, then that's one type of a problem. How much money am I losing through that? So I can run the numbers and tell you what would be my IT budget for trying to prevent it. Then there is intellectual property and trade secrets. What is that? What does that mean if this is being stolen from us, and how do we protect that? And there's a third one, which is we have a bunch of customers, including if we are a B2C, we have tons of customers also in a B2B that we would not like to expose. And if they are being exposed, what does that mean? On the B2B, that means I'm going to lose a lot of business very quickly. On a B2C is maybe less of an issue. I mean, Target lost, all the Social Security numbers that they had, and they're still doing quite well. And the same thing for zillion other corporations. So I'm not sure. So I think we have three, not just one.
What about impact? What impact can they have on the problem at large? Clients, I mean.
Impact our clients. Their thoughts is in general, what is the minimal I can get away with? I've never seen a business that thinks any other way. What is the minimal I can get away with?
Well, yeah, go ahead, Axon.
I unfortunately have to agree.
Yeah, which translates into, we don't really want to have any impact. We want to kind of check the boxes and move on. It's not our problem, right? Is maybe the.
Yes, and that's why I think our discussion from yesterday, and the idea of having a central repository that points it out will make the difference. Because if I'm, as a consumer, will stop doing business with Target because Target has, I don't know, very bad value, if credit value, they have no credit with me with regard to how they protect my information, then people will stop going there. If this is a way to, so there needs to be like an external thing to influence those. There needs to be a driver, and right now there is no driver for our client. The only driver is bad people doing bad things, and they just need to measure the risk. It's like, what's my risk of getting into my car and getting into an accident tomorrow? Well, I'm paying. That's why I'm paying, I don't know, X number of dollars a month to for insurance. If the risk was extremely high, I would pay more. Yes, but it's not high enough.
Have we considered that it depends on the impact? I mean, sure, they're going to do absolute minimum, but a good analogy would be like if you live in a town called Volcanoville up in the sticks in the middle of the Sierra Nevadas, right?
Yep.
And somebody runs onto your property with a firearm, chances are you have a firearm at your property, because if you call the sheriff, it's going to take them 2 hours to get there. Compared to somebody that's in the city who would probably call the police and expect the police to show up in less than 30 minutes and maybe help them deal with the problem. And so the person that lives remotely may have to defend their own position because of their situation versus somebody that lives in the city where they can be they can lean more heavily on government services, right?
Yep.
So business is the same way, depending on your situation, right? Your minimum is going to be much different than another person's minimum, but some organizations, depending upon what it is that they're trying to protect, if we're talking true cybersecurity, it's a protection mindset, then that is going to be it is their problem, I guess is my point.
Right. Well,
but it's risk probabilities. That's it. It's all about probabilities relative to my business. If I'm going to lose all my business and it's a high probability, then I'm going to put a lot of money to try to protect it. Within my budget, that's my cost of doing business. But if it's very low probability, why would I even care?
Well, I don't know. I don't want to throw anybody under the bus here, but I can tell you that I've been talking to a very large hyperscaler infrastructure provider. And they assure their customers, and they call them, of course, not customers, but tenants, that everything is fine and hunky-dory. And they are one of the biggest infrastructure providers, right? They're not known, nobody knows them, but they are. And they, about a month ago, decided that they need to figure out if there's anything they need to do. So they try to hire a chief information security officer a month ago.
for the first time, just a month
For the
ago?
first time. Right.
Well,
So because I know them well and they know me, they called me and they said, is there something you could help us when we interview the guy to figure out if he actually knows what the hell he's talking about? And I'm like, I fell off my chair.
It just showed you that, they didn't deem it as high risk until a month ago or 2 months ago. They were willing to make promises that if they failed, they would get sued. They've taken all the risks that and they felt they're fine with those risks. So that's what I'm trying to say. It's a business risk assessment relative to the gain, relative to whatever else.
Well, yeah. So there was something this is in a sense, the problem with cybersecurity is one, like every other crime, there's motive. The criminals have access, they have opportunity, and there's no disincentive, right? Or no serious disincentive heretofore. So we've got the perfect formula for crimes, just cybercrime this time, right? So in that sense, it's kind of a predictable sort of a scenario. And I fixed the question of, is it our problems to fix? I think each client, thinks it is their problem, and to the extent that it concerns their business, their organization. But I think the problem at large, I think a lot of them don't feel like it's their problem to fix. Just like, again, I equate this to, tobacco use or seat belts while driving. It's like it's a public public good kind of a thing that's affecting everybody. But until the government gets involved and makes a public awareness campaign out of it, and everybody as an individual gets behind the value of something like that, it's hard to make it everybody's problem, right? It's a personal choice or a business choice. So
yeah, one element that's kind of in the realm of what we're talking about here that I've personally experienced in working for large corporations is, eventually the P&L and the budgets all roll up to one place. And this isn't oftentimes really sexy, right? So what I've seen is a very reactive posture where something bad happens, and then it's the effort du jour in a company, a bunch of money gets thrown at it, but it's always with this understanding that this is a quick stemming of the issue, and then we're going to go back to business as normal, where we often underinvest and don't make strategic investments. So I've seen that happen for decades, and I think it's tied to kind of funding source and overall maybe a conflict of goals within some companies.
well, maybe there's a stakeholder here called company executive or large company executive who maybe are a stakeholder category all of their own, because I think these people have a lot of power and influence and could have an impact if they were to, to the extent that they set decision making around security for their organization. So I don't know. I mean, do you guys think that that's a stakeholder category, the enterprise executive?
I think you're absolutely right. It's a stakeholder category, but the problem is that Equifax still exists instead of having been sued out of existence. Yeah. And the CEO is still there, right? I mean, that's ridiculous. Yeah. I think the issue that everybody learned out of it is, well, we get breached, tough shit, we get breached, right? We don't go under. And my personal preference would have been that Equifax not only gets sued, but the entire business model gets forbidden, because I never signed a contract with them to collect my data. I never did, right? And I never will.
Yeah, I kind of, the way I used to tee it up to my leadership when looked like we weren't getting support on big strategic security initiatives, I said, okay, so we're opting for the one black eye model. We'll wait till someone punches us, and then we'll worry about it and do something. So we won't get two black eyes, but we're going to wait till we get the first black eye.
What about Infosec vendors in terms of resources? We listed in beliefs and motivations, but
don't get me started. Okay, let me put it in very simple terms. If the software guys would be able to stop it, right, their next year's business would go away. Therefore, they have a complete disincentive of making the shit work, right? Well, okay. They can only sell you a subscription that is 3 or 5 years if the attacks keep going and are successful, right? That's one of the reasons why I hate software solutions for cybersecurity, because fundamentally they cannot work. And not only cannot they work, the providers have no incentive to make it work.
Yeah, I mean, they're disincentivized, and that's not unique to software or, or hardware or services, right? I mean, there's a lot of people in, look, admittedly, I will tell you, I was beating my head against the wall for several years talking to privately held, non-regulated entities about the importance of cybersecurity, and it was falling on deaf ears. And all of a sudden now my phone's ringing off the hook with, hey, what should we do about this? I feel vindicated. So, I don't necessarily want the problem to continue in its current fashion just so I can feel vindicated. But, it's kind of like, there's some sense of, I told you so. And,
Well, Axel, let's if we can just rethink it for a second. Doctors are disincentivized to get you healthy, yes, because you're not going to come again. We're not going to go after doctors, so let's not go after the Infosec vendors. I hear you. I love the thought, and I think you're right. There are also some probably shady Infosec people in the space as well. But I like to give them some credit. I do go to doctors. I do want to stay alive. So regardless.
Well, but there may be there may be more truth to this than cynicism, because there are practices in medical insurance where you have to wonder. Chris might be able to add to this, where we keep applying the same things, and the percentages of people actually recovering from things and moving on and getting off treatment are in the 10 to 20%. So.
But you also have to recognize that doctors are not pills. And I think there's been plenty of pursuit of the drug manufacturers as the villain with incentive to continue to make their drugs. Much like you wouldn't try to chase your value-added reseller who integrated the product they did not build if you have an issue with it. I was like, well, I didn't bake the cookies, I just sold them to you and I configured it the best that I can according to what you told me to. And I think that's the challenge you run into in every industry. And it's not just, you know, and we could gripe about it all day long, but, you know, the reality is there has to be a balance. And their motivation, a vendor's motivation, is going to vary. So whether or not they're incented to solve something is, you know, can be looked at from two different lenses, right? And that's the, you know, if you want to make your customer happy, then you know, take something hot and you cool it down, which is why a lot of point solutions are sold when there's a cybersecurity incident, right? So there's never any proactive thought when it comes down to the bean counting and nothing has happened. It's just it's the reactive nature of most business leaders.
You know, I would, if I may, can I question why I think I know the answer, but why do we have Infosec vendors on the list? Why are they a stakeholder?
Because because I think we're looking to them as potential solutions to the problem. They admittedly have raised their hand and said we're a stakeholder in the world of cybersecurity, right? They by self-identified, I think, because a lot of their marketing reads as we can help you solve X, Y, or Z in cybersecurity. So I think they've nominated themselves to be on here de facto. So.
Part of the ecosystem, I guess.
They're part of the ecosystem, but you know, the clients are the people who are suffering. Regulators are people that I think should do something. Private citizens may or may not should do something, etc. So the Infosec guys are, you know, just vendors who see there's a problem here. I'm going to step in and do my best to help solve, you know, stamp it, solve the problem. But that's it. I mean, they are not a suffering entity. They're not going to suffer from the fact that you have a problem.
No, but the stakeholders are not. It's just anybody that's in the ecosystem, right? That has anything to do with the situation. So per the rubric, I mean, we could change the rubric, but as far as this goes, and you really want to have more than less. And some of them, just by virtue of fleshing out their beliefs, motivation, resources, and impact, will become less relevant to the conversation just through going through the process. So we can move them down in priority. But well, let's look at regulators because we don't have anything for them. So first of all, who are we talking about, right? Because there's different kinds. Chris, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, before we move on, because I had a question for the group, something I don't know, and I'd love feedback on. So if Infosec vendors are part of the ecosystem for right now that we're talking about under resources, and it's funny, I was thinking the same medical analogies too. If I have tonsillitis in this country, there's a reasonable chance that any doctor I go to is going to do a pretty good job in diagnosing and do it. For Infosec vendors and resources, do we feel like there's a bare minimum of competence and thoroughness in the industry, or is that part of the problem that it's all over the place? And so then the clients are left trying to figure out, what they need. They're kind of diagnosing themselves and getting varying levels of quality and thoroughness. So I don't know if that's an issue or not. I'd love to hear from this group.
Absolutely an issue.
Part of that, if I may.
In my experience, I can tell you that we haven't been able to get any decent support from any of the Infosec vendors. We basically did it all ourselves. We had to sift through, megabytes of firewall logs and this and that, and the McAfees and Nortons and all of the others. They were of zero help.
Have we considered the idea that these vendors all communicate because they have to? Norton, antivirus vendors being a great example, right? They all have to be able to share their signatures, right? They have to work together. So maybe what this needs to be is ISAOs.
Well, they do. They talk to each other, but sometimes it's embargoed. So for example, all of the RSA hack that was 10 years ago, that just came out now because the embargo ended on reporting on it, right? I can send that out.
No, totally agree. And I think, so here's what I propose, right? Do we replace Infosec vendors with ISAOs? Because that's where they go. Or do we add ISAOs? And
What's an ISAO, George? Sorry.
Information sharing and analysis organizations.
Oh, okay.
Where they all share all the antivirus companies, all the security vendors, they as a community, right? They kind of figured it out, right? You know, you have to share information to make your products better.
Right. So to some degree that exists, right? So if you look at, for example, the entire Snort database and the entire database that is behind SquidGuard, if you look at sans.org, if you look at MITRE, right? So that's all information sharing. And the issue is, how much do the individual companies take out of it, right? Whether they use it or not, it's of course up to them, right? But then of course there are other attacks that simply, for the most part, they don't really care much about, because they know they can't do much about it, right? And so they just drop it. So in my experience, I rely on the open source stuff, and whether you use, Snort or whether you use the Cisco equivalent, it doesn't matter. It's the same database, in fact, right? So, but if your firewall admin doesn't know how to read the rules, then you're screwed, right? It doesn't matter.
Well, we just gave a name to, that was good, because we just gave a name to this category of people, which I was having a hard time kind of figuring out what to label them, but that maybe they're SAOs more than anything else. But the one question or comment that somebody made, I do see a problem where organizations that have an interest in doing something about cybersecurity have to go and sift through the myriad of information security vendors and consultants. They're not well prepared to have those conversations and be able to figure out what they need. So there's a layer of liaison or middle men or women, people who should be the translators between the InfoSec vendors and the general business community. It's sort of like, I have a friend who has a company that helps, it's called Data Science Team for Hire, because all they do is help clients figure out which data science apps they need. And they kind of come in, put the apps in, and then help you hire somebody in-house and leave, right? It's like that equivalent. I mean, I think that's a big problem. Like I talked about my friend David Spark, who has the CISO vendor relationship podcast, which is really popular. He has CISOs on every week, and they do a little segment where they take a website of an InfoSec vendor, redact the name and some of the telltale signs, and the CISO will read the copy on the website and try to guess who the vendor is and what they do, and 90% of the time he can't. So it just kind of tells you what how big the problem is. So I don't know who those people would be if they existed. I mean, that would do this kind of translating between the InfoSec vendor community and the business community.
Alex, it's funny. We like to think that, or I like to think that we all understand the problem, blah, 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 blah. But can we talk a little bit about the criminal side as stakeholders before we continue?
Yeah.
Let's cover them. Let's see if we understand their reasoning and what's going on down there. What's their belief? For example, I have no idea. What's the cyber criminal belief?
Well, I think they believe, for one, that they can get away with this, right? Because if they didn't, they probably wouldn't do it. So.
They believe that regardless of what we're going to do, they will figure out ways to get away with it. That's true. Believe they can get away with it. A and B, I'm sure they believe that they can become very cost effective in their process.
What do you mean?
That they have a great ROI.
That they have a great ROI.
Yeah, this business has great ROI. Now we need to understand that
that's a motivation more than a belief, I think, right?
But it's also a belief. It's not just a motivation. Yeah, it's both. Okay, you say great ROI as a motivation.
And their mindset is that the opportunities are everywhere. whether malicious or otherwise. So.
What else do they believe? I mean,
Yes.
well, we're saying cyber criminal, but what about the hacktivists who are, they're criminals de facto because they're doing something that is illegal in some jurisdictions, but they're not the same as a kind of a criminal ransomware gang, right? That's doing it purely for profit.
Well, I think they've got a very simple motivation. And the belief is, if you steal something out of a house where the door is unlocked, it's not illegal, right? And I think that's exactly what they apply. If it's so easy to get in, then it should be legal, and therefore I shouldn't be punished for all the shit that I steal.
I like that one.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Great ROI. It's you opened the door and you invited me into your house.
Yeah.
Well, to the extent that they've interviewed some of these folks, right, or they have read some of the communications and some of the forums, the dark web forums, these people feel like they can do this with impunity, and that also it's on you if you're gonna essentially not do anything about cybersecurity and leave the front door open. That there's some of that mindset, yeah.
So maybe part of that would be to suggest. Well, another thing is just to say that the cyber, playing field is not your normal. It's not your house. So they never really get into your house. Moving in this cyberspace is a different dimension. It does not belong. It's not part of the normal 3 dimensions that are being protected by law.
Well, I mean, I agree. Because ultimately, if you look at where the attackers are from and where the targets mostly are, they're in a different country, right? So the internet very, very clearly has leveled the playing field. So if you get attacked out of a guy in Ukraine and you're in the US, well, good luck trying to prosecute him, right? Ain't gonna happen.
I can make it even more crazier. Okay, so let's assume that you are in virtual space in a game. And it's a game where you have diggers, you've got people who can make money. There are ways to buy and sell things within the game itself, like you create a structure, you can sell it, etc. And you end up with actual Bitcoin as a result, as those transactions. I can gang up on you and steal things from you, or hurt you, or kill you in the game and cause you damage as a result. There are no laws against it.
No, I think what you're missing is the fact that it's even more hierarchical right now. There's a hierarchy of these criminals, right? There's one set that offers the ransomware as a kit. You can buy it on the black market. So they don't breach companies themselves. They just say, hey, if you want to have the kit, it's 200 grand, or it's 5 Bitcoin, or this or that. And then when you buy the kit, you not commercialize it. You customize it towards your target audience, and then these guys are breaching their targets, right? So to some degree, they don't even know how to write the ransomware anymore, because they just buy it as a kit, right? And so they have even less the feeling of doing something illegal, because they bought a legitimate kit, right?
No, the other way around. The people who are creating the software, they definitely don't do anything illegal. They've never broke into any system. Never. That's not what they do. Right. They created something that can break to any system. So they created an atomic bomb, but they've never used it. That's not their job to use it.
I realize that hacktivists don't necessarily apply because they're such a small part of the problem, right? That they're not really. It shouldn't be considered in this context. So, well, what resources do cyber criminals have? I mean, they have obviously they have cyber talent, and a lot of our clients don't. So that tips the scales of power. Infosec skills. I mean.
But again, because it's a great ROI, it's just a great business. So for them, the financials are working in their favor.
Immunity from kind of de facto immunity from. I mean, it's not a resource per se; it's a motivator. Time. They have the resource of time.
Yep.
Well, you just take those two things. On the one hand, you have our clients, right? Or the general public that has no InfoSec skills and very little time. You've got cyber criminals that have the two things that we consider as, critical sort of resources, right? For any business or organization. It's, you can see how that's the power balance is completely out of whack. So
They have access to open source.
Well, actually, they have access to open and to closed source. I mean, ever since the SolarWinds breach, believe me, every single piece of closed source software has been stolen. It is somewhere in a repository.
Yeah. So they have access to open and closed source. Our clients have no idea. Our clients don't have the talent to be able to even read that source to understand what's going on.
what impact are they having? If we look at everything that's gone on, what's been the impact of all of this besides individual entities losing and people losing money and sleep?
Well, why do you think Microsoft has revived?
Wait a minute. Before the impact, there's one more thing that they have an advantage. Our systems are getting more complex over time. That's an advantage for them.
What's the correlation from that to what they have?
It's an advantage that they have because as we complexify the system, we open up holes in the system. And it's harder for us to even understand what we are doing because we are not single-minded trying to protect the system from intrusion. We want to build new technology. We want to build new things. And as we build new things, we actually break some old things that were very important to us that we already forgot. And that's part of the deal for them. So they always have openings because we advance. So we are moving into VR right now. And everything that you and I and all of us are talking about is going to fly through the window, and it's going to be completely new issues associated with VR in the next few years. And that's just one example. And if you disagree with me, just, we can talk a lot more.
Well, so that you're talking about a lot of opportunity in a large attack surface. So
yes, that we actually, you and I, or people who create new tech are increasing the opportunity for the cyber criminal space. So inadvertently, we are creating more and more opportunities over time. We are not shrinking the space. The space grows exponentially over time.
yeah, I mean, opportunity isn't necessarily a resource; it's an advantage. So I'm having a hard time.
Okay, so let's put it in advantage. I need to understand. Yeah,
Well, we don't
figure those out.
I mean, these are the categories, right? We're not advantages. That's sort of like a layer below, right? When you get into more granular kind of looking at each one of these stakeholders individually, we can get into the kind of a advantages, disadvantages, SWOT analysis. But I think we're trying to stay high level at this point.
So they have more money to spend on attacking us than we have on securing us.
Yeah, I mean, so to the extent that they're being funded in the case of a nation state backed threat actor, they are being funding. I mean, so InfoSec vendors have funding, the cyber criminals have funding. So yeah, Axel, you were going to say something about impact they're having. Why do you think Microsoft something?
Yeah, so Microsoft has revived the idea of basically killing off Windows 10 and 10X. So they're now basically saying, well, we have to change the code base and even the core, the kernel of the operating system. And I can nearly guarantee you that was not because they had so much fun doing that. That was because somebody breached the kernel code for Windows 10.
So the impact is that they're influencing vendors and government and business,
well,
influencing events.
Yes. So if Microsoft now revives Windows 11 and the idea of killing off 10, then that's a cost to Microsoft. And I can guarantee you that if Microsoft does it, then all of the other guys will scratch their heads. Linux and FreeBSD and FreeRTOS and all these guys, they will have a very close look at what their kernel does, how it works, how the entire, memory allocation schemes and the interprocessor communication works, I can nearly guarantee you they will all coincide. They will all have a new version with a new kernel by mid next year, because they have to, because nobody at this point in time can guarantee that their operating system kernel hasn't been breached one way or another.
That's fun. A lot of fun.
George, while we have you here, you mentioned AI, and I think we all agreed that that's a stakeholder that needs to be in this. Can you talk a little bit about what you think are, if we approach AI as a distinct entity, kind of with some anthropomorphic qualities, perhaps, what are its beliefs, motivations, resources, and impact?
That is a really exceptional question that I can't answer alone. I'll try. I think that the landscape that is AI is almost like somewhat like an ISAO. People sharing information together to improve intelligence of artificial systems, do tasks that humans can't do. I know that was always the call to action, and we've arrived there. And that, to the point in the argument of the fact that even though AI essentially has the equal intelligence as an earthworm in aggregate, it can do things much faster than humans. So things that humans can't do. So I think the belief is that almost to the Isaac Asimov, concept in science fiction writing, which is to serve. That is the the impetus behind artificial intelligence, is to serve and go beyond what humans can do. I think the other part of that is recognizing that AI is really, because it's man-made, it's man-like. And so there are, I think from a belief perspective, you start to tread in some really interesting water when you start talking about AI. And, if it really does believe like some humans do, we have issues. But I don't think that a community is going to think in any other way than what you've identified, in that they can do things that humans can't. They can be a path to new innovation as a motivation. So new innovation, is a big piece of the puzzle. As far as the resource area is concerned, I think it absolutely offers speed. So I agree with that. It also offers, I'm going to say it the way that I'm thinking it, which is simplification of big complex data and patterns within data. Perhaps that is even an outcome or a result of using AI. So the impact is, I think the impact area is, simplification of data.
Simplification of data.
Or probably a better way to say that would be meaningful information out of complex large data streams is really, that's what I'm saying. I do struggle with this, simplifying this, and but ultimately, if you are looking at AI as an entity, it's going to serve the human, is what it's going to do. It's going to serve the needs of the human. But I think what they're talking about with these AI documents is that it's there to serve itself as well, to make itself better, to make itself faster.
Well, and that's a motivation, right? To grow, right? I mean, it's strange because if we're doing this exercise, should we be talking about AI in the first person? You know what I mean? Like, should I even be phrasing these in the
Yeah,
first?
I don't know. I feel like I have to watch Bicentennial Man this weekend and tell you on Monday.
Yeah, I'm looking at the chat. Yeah, all interesting questions. I mean, the impact is, I don't know. I mean, I'm not an AI sort of expert. I'm just sort of like I'm curious from afar is maybe one way to describe it. But it seems to me that the promise that I hear a lot is being able to synthesize a bunch of different tasks and simplify them, right? So it's kind of like the promise of big data, prescriptive analytics, and all this sort of stuff all rolled into one. Economies of scale, right, on computing and labor and sort of all these things. I mean, I don't know. The thing where I think it sort of is very, very far off is like the notion that, like the Big Blue versus Gary Kasparov, right, kind of idea, right? So at what point can, well, there's a finite number of permutations in chess, even though I think it's in the tens of millions, but you know, can it create something out of nothing, right? Is that part of the scope for AI?
We had a saying about AI, and this was back in the late 70s when I was an undergrad, that AI was a self-defeating field because every time AI made a breakthrough and did something new, it wasn't AI anymore because a computer could do it.
That's interesting.
I think it's a tough call, really. There's so many. It depends on how you look at it. I mean, the impact is infinite.
Well, I mean, and also, is it undefined at this point? Is that part of the problem? Is that we don't know what the impact's going to be? I mean,
yeah, and it has to serve a purpose on the topic, obviously, but yeah, you could say, you know, that it's unknown, it's infinite. There's a great recording on AI that I'll send if anyone wants to look at it later. It's just send it in the chat. I don't know, maybe I can have Vint come and talk to us about it, because that's kind of the tip of his spear.
Who's that?
Vint Cerf. He talks on AI all the time. I think I can have a conversation with him about it and see what. But like he and I have been talking about the NIST IR document and how the scientific community is responding to it. So.
If you could connect me to him, that would be great, because I got a bunch of ideas in hardware. So let's have a look.
All right, I'll reach out to him.
Okay, thanks.
All right, so we got about 9 minutes left. We haven't heard from Kirk or Nicole, for that matter. I don't know if you guys want to add anything. We certainly would love all points of views. Definitely want to be our own chamber.
I'll spare you, Nicole, and I'll go first. As is true to form to my personality, I always go for the existential 50,000-foot view. And you know, Axel's been my my cheerleader on this, which is the whole. Let me start that sentence over again. Our clients have resigned to the fact that they have no dignity any longer surrounding security. They do not believe that security, based on the frequency of the hacks at this point and the fact that it now is mushroom clouding, it's accelerating, okay? The fact that it's now getting more serious and it's hitting pipelines and it's hitting meatpacking. I think that by and large, whether you're talking about influencers or people who are workaday people, they have gotten to the point where they just, they've resigned themselves. There is no dignity surrounding this, and we're just going to get rolled up. And I think that's a collective, because if we were able to, quote, trust government to solve this, like other issues that we don't trust government to solve, and I'm not going to get into that, it would have been solved. But I'll go back to the fact that Apple introduced a new CPU. The minute it hit the market, it had already been compromised, even though it was manufactured and designed in a secure skunkworks environment. It doesn't matter what Microsoft does about a new kernel. The fact of the matter is we work in reactive mode. And the rest of what we do is BS until we get them working in reactive mode. And the fact of the matter is everything that can be made can be broken, whether it's machine learning or AI or whatever you want to call it, any kernel, every hardware chip, everything that can be made will be broken. And I'm going to go back to what Shmuel has really cemented into my brain. It's because of the human factor. It's not because necessarily the code is weak necessarily. We could write the perfect code, but somebody's going to get to somebody. So the question is, do we take this on and fix this platform for generations to go, and we flip the shark? We flip the script, and they are in reactive mode. And yes, they have the unlimited resource of time and money. What if we took away that money? Even though we have ne'er-do-well, possibly, governments that may be funding this secretly or not, I don't want to get into that. But the point is that what if we cut them off financially? We take the high ground and we define the rules of the game. When you define the rules of the game, you get different results. So Infosec vendors, yeah, they're part of the problem as well, because they haven't changed the rules of the game. They play within the game. And that's how I look at it. And I try to keep that enthusiasm suppressed. So that's why you didn't hear from me, but thanks for calling on me.
You bring up an interesting point, Kirk, in that, there's a lot of talk already of, if we take away the financial sort of motive, incentive, ability, opportunity, right, that will stop ransomware. So people are saying, either outlaw crypto, which is not really practical because a very small percentage of crypto use case is actually ransomware payments. It's got a whole life of its own aside from that. People are saying make ransom payments illegal. Some ransom payments are illegal. So we, at this group, we decided we were going to wait to sort of jump on one of those kinds of solutions that we think are a foregone conclusion that have to play some part in it, and then kind of see, if we're going to transform the system, what fundamentally is broken about the system, right? And looking at the stakeholders who are involved and what their characteristics are is probably one way to arrive at, flipping the system. Well, what does that actually look like, right? So, Shmuel, we've got, a few minutes left. I don't know if you want to segue us into next steps or kind of.
I think we should. I don't think I'm not sure about you, but it doesn't feel that we've actually finished this this spreadsheet yet. What do you think, Alex?
No, but we've made some progress, and we
did good progress. Yeah,
we need to figure out, what we want to do as a next step. Do we want to continue to try to fill it out, or is there a better way to fill it out, or do we, that's kind of why we want to pause and sort of think about things, and then we're going to have a summary of the meeting and a touch base tomorrow. So to the extent that people have ideas.
I'm almost thinking that maybe to finish this specific exercise, we call a few other people. Some of them could not even, participate today. We'll call the rest of the team to a separate meeting, between now and the next, whatever it is, so we can finish this, and then we can present it to the team. I'm almost kind of like thinking next month we'll continue with the privacy because we had a good traction on that, and I want to move it forward. And in between now and August, we can have a meeting between meetings and to finish some of this work of this topic and then come back and present it in August.
So per our progression flow, we do break out into sort of, or we would break out into like separate work streams or kind of groups, smaller focus groups on a subtopic or a tributary that potentially leads to a solution or something like that. We're sort of at the same point in privacy, although that's maybe gone a little differently. So I think that's something we need to decide. Is this the juncture at which we break out and do the stakeholder mapping stuff in a smaller group, and that maybe it'll flow faster that way? TBD, right? I mean,
we could. I do not mind if we want to continue this meeting in same group or smaller, and plus other stakeholders that we want to invite before we continue, or kind of like my thinking is that we didn't finish the work on this yet. I don't know, the rest of the team can, jump in, but I think there's more work here that needs to be done. There's easy another hour meeting before we can break into subgroups to do other things. We did break privacy to subgroups, and I would like the first subgroup to go and report next month. So I think it would make some sense, and not to lose traction on the privacy while continuing on the cybersecurity. So I don't want to lose traction on that either. So it might be a separate meeting that like in between that we are creating, if this is okay. And unless people think that we're already finished and we're ready to jump into, okay, here are the subgroups, here are areas that we need to, focus on and research based on this work. I don't see it yet, but maybe other people see better. Okay, I see nodes. So let's say we'll continue on. There will be another meeting, Alex, that we can call in between meetings, and it will happen in the next some time, or we will follow up in August. I think we are going to lose momentum if we wait until August. So I would just suggest we'll do it a little bit earlier. In August, there will be just reporting, breaking to subgroups, and other focuses around security.
well, we have a quick touch base call tomorrow, so we can chat about it more then. And in the meantime, if folks have thoughts, you could send us a note. We could pick this up on Slack. George, I don't know if you're part of our Slack channel for IFTBOH.
I thought I was. Hang on. I am, yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, so we can have further discussion on this and between in the next few days, and if people have feedback, they can send an email. I mean, I'm honestly I'm a lot of my assumptions about who the stakeholders are and what their characteristics were kind of simplistic, and this exercise is really helping me understand how there's much more to each stakeholder and various facets, and I don't know, I think that informs the larger problem. So if it was for me, I would, if folks were up for it, I'd keep going in some way to try to get to fleshing this thing out further, even if we have to send people a Google form to fill out on their own time, if that's a better use of everyone's time. But what?
However works for you. I'm good with okay. All of the above. Yes, and I do want to maintain the momentum and just go through it, finish this form, and move forward in our steps. But I don't want to jump to the next step before we finish.
Okay. By the way, I'm going to post a Security Village cybersecurity happy hour next Monday at 4 on Zoom. I'm going to post that in the chat. Those are always cool events, and I think everybody here is would be interested in networking with some like-minded individuals. Maybe Stan Stahl, who you guys have seen here, is that's Stan's group. So, oops. Let me see if there's a link here. That didn't work. Sorry.
Perfect. So are we also in agreement that we'll continue privacy next month? Awesome. I love that. We had good momentum, and I want to recapture that. Okay, guys. Anything else, Alex?
No,
Right,
that's it. I'll post the Security Village thing in the Slack. That link didn't come through. So, but no, thank you everybody for their time. This is really interesting. So
Thank you for the time and helping us navigate through this, very complex issue. It's very complex. Thank you.
all right,
Thanks, Alex.
Cool. See you guys next month.
bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Not before.
Bye.
Mm.